and welcome to the channel's tour debut of the Point Defiance Zoo.
On today's episode, you'll be getting a walkthrough of their Asian forest sanctuary. We'll get up close to some amazing animals, including at least one that some of you may have never heard of before. We'll compare and contrast this exhibit to the one that may have inspired it, and you'll learn why what you see today might not be what you get on your actual visit. Before we do anything, if you like getting free virtual visits to the zoo, I recommend pressing those subscribe and bell buttons to officially join our crew. Then I would like all of you to comment below what never before featured zoo would you like to see in 2025. And then later I will put the top 5 suggestions to a vote. Your journey to the sanctuary will actually begin after you've spent some time swimming with the fishes in the tropical reef aquarium, which we will see on another tour. When you reach the surface, it'll push you towards the most immersive and often most peaceful part of the zoo, which takes up approximately 4.5 of the park's 29 acres. This area opened in 2004, highlighting tropical regions from Southeast Asia. And the very first signage gives you a rundown of the exhibit itself and previews what's now an outdated list of the animals that you could see. And it won't be too long before you reach the first of 7 habitats. Most of them can be described as average, but they are part of a very complex system, and it's best if I show you from above. 5 of the 7 living spaces can rotate multiple species on a scheduled basis. Something I imagine just had to be inspired by the Louisville Zoo's Islands complex that does the same thing with 4 enclosures and even some of the same animals. Despite what the sign out front will tell you though, this sanctuary currently has 8 species and 7 of them rotate. The first ones that gave me any sort of movement were the Siamang gibbons, a member of the lesser ape family. Even with the identification signs scattered around the trail, I struggled for a second to figure out who these were, since I'm used to seeing gibbons off the ground like this, when all I could make out were 2 black fur balls in the grass. Not to sound like a spoiled kid that didn't get what they wanted, I didn't exactly get the ideal rotation that I was hoping for. If I had to make a list, the endangered Lowland Anoa would be at the very top. It's always a pleasure to be in the presence of a species that makes you go, what is that? Even if you do read their signage. If you didn't know any better, you might guess that this is a baby water buffalo. Baby bean here is fully grown. Anoas are the world's smallest kind of buffalo and the world's smallest kind of wild cattle. If you do find her all alone, don't worry, that's just in their nature. However, the zoo will occasionally mix her with the Siamangs and the white-handed gibbons to keep her some not-so-quiet company. Whether the design was intentional or not, this is where I started to really see more similarities between most of this sanctuary's habitats and the ones in Louisville's islands. They're not big, they're meshed, slightly detailed, and they both have a public day room. Except in Washington, you can see the animals walk inside and out. And this one even connects to another enclosure, but we'll come back to that soon. In the middle of this forest, literally in the middle of all this mix-up madness, is the first open-top display that's a little heavier and louder on the aquatics, so I expected to see the otters and got a Malayan tapir. Regardless, it was nice to see the zoo use a glass barrier. Not once, but twice when you include the backside of the enclosure. I know a lot of photographers are not big fans of glass, but this is one of the few chances life will give you to get within centimeters of this amazing relative of the rhino. Sadly, they did not share my enthusiasm. No encounter with a tapir? Fine by me. I'll just get my close-ups with one of the few things that can eat them. A very active Sumatran tiger, busy spraying and rubbing their own scent. And this is one reason why I love the idea of rotating animals. Not only do the inhabitants get a different view or setting every day, they can also pick up each other's smells, which I know a lot of zoos use as enrichment. This third display that we just skipped earlier also has double-sided acrylic viewing with mesh on the sides, so whoever is in here can technically see a piece of every living space that's part of the rotation, including the largest one in the rotation and the most detailed, terrained, and just all around the best part of the sanctuary, and the third best in the entire zoo in my opinion, with the red wolf being number 1 and muskox being number 2. From my own experience, even the best tiger exhibits don't hide the cats this well, and all of the open space provided a fascinating daily keeper chat. You can learn about the tigers in the wild, at the zoo and their successful breeding program, along with a feeding, which finally allowed me to scratch off "Tiger catches food midair" off my shot list. Now that we've covered all 5 of the utility displays, I just wanted to give a quick breakdown of what animals you could see in each habitat based on old photos and common sense. All 7 species, including a hornbill, there was one sign for a wrinkled hornbill, can access the 3 enclosed spaces. You can find the big cats in these 4, otherwise if they were where the tapir was, it probably wouldn't go so well. But the only species that don't have the hops, like the Anoa, tapir, and otters, have the option to be in all 5 spaces. I also feel the need to mention the theming. It's very subtle but effective. The signage outside of the identifications is one of my favorite sets that I've ever seen. We really need to go back to colored pencil sketches and watercolors. The other objects represent cultural symbols, conservation messages, and that includes the illegal wildlife trade. The real gut puncher came from the tape recorder. I didn't really capture it well enough, but it's actually supposed to be a recording of what sounds like a forest being destroyed and human civilization taking over. And the sign next to it pretty much confirms my guess. As the footpath starts to make its way towards the exit, you'll pass the other side of the middle display where the tapir was, and the other side of where the Siamangs were, and eventually meet the cats of the Canopy, a 2011 edition, 7 years after the sanctuary opened, and it was a very welcoming addition indeed. $1 million well spent. It's home to clouded leopards, the only species around here that isn't classified as endangered. They still are threatened and classified as vulnerable to extinction. It's one of those exhibits that's so good and does its job so well that it's not easy to see the animals when they're in the main exhibit, which is, or apparently was, the tallest clouded leopard display in the United States. Before my visit, I was actually told I might not see them, but fortunately they have a fairly standard day room where it was impossible for me to miss them. It's been quite the journey so far, but we will have to end it on a sad note, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to give this moment justice, so bear with me if you're a local. Just a few days before my visit, the Point Defiance Zoo said goodbye to their largest, oldest, and what they called their most beloved resident, Suki, their Asian elephant, who was a former circus performer that called Tacoma home for nearly 3 decades and almost lived to be 60 years old, making her one of the oldest of her kind in the country. I didn't even talk to anyone about her, but I could feel how loved she was. The flowers and even the tears that I saw showed that she will be remembered for a very long time. No one publicly knows what will happen to her home just yet, but as others have pointed out for actually over a decade now, I can't help agree that it would make a great space for Indian rhinos to keep the conservation and Asian theme going. So, fingers crossed. And that, my friends, was our first in-depth tour of the Point Defiance Zoo. One of the smallest, but yet, dare I say, one of the most underrated zoos in the nation. The next time that you hear from me, we will be staying in Tacoma and exploring not just one, but both of the zoo's aquariums. So please stay tuned for the next episode, stay wild, and thank you all for watching Zoo Tours.